And now, please welcome Al Roker and Eric Schmidt.
Good morning. How is everybody? Morning. Oh my gosh, here we are. Eric and I color coordinated today. This worked out. We're pretty in pink.
Well, welcome to Miami.
That's right. I'm really thrilled to be chatting with you, Eric. And it's interesting, I think, in that you talk about timing. The UK Met Office just released a study that shows the probability over the next 5 years of surpassing the 1.5 degrees centigrade limit is at 50%. 2 years ago, it was at 20%. Last year, 40%. We're now at the likelihood of sometime in the next 5 years reaching that threshold and surpassing it. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, we call it climate change. This is climate destruction. And because of the negative feedback loops, so-called positive feedback loops in the system, it accelerates. And every month and every year and every decade that we delay, the cost is infinitely higher for the people who follow us. And it's a horrific burden to put on your children and your grandchildren, and we should be ashamed of it. We should get this thing fixed. We could do it if we worked really hard on it.
We were just chatting, and you brought something up that was interesting, that we have a lot of these tools. We have a lot of these technologies. But what we are lacking is, in a sense, from our government, the will to do it. That if this were a war, we would be fighting this much differently.
Look, I mean, in a real war, we would be doing whatever it took to preserve our land, our people, the lives, the housing, and so forth. We're not operating that way. We know roughly how to solve half the problem, which is sort of vehicles and things like that. There are a very large number of very hard problems involving concrete and steel and the so-called hard problems in energy, which we need to fund significant investment in. And I don't mean to be a downer on a beautiful pink Miami day, but the fact of the matter is I think the math doesn't work today. The assumptions that we are all making, and what everyone here in this audience is doing is important, so please continue everything you're doing. It's not enough. It's not going to get ahead of the demand curve, the carbon loading curve of the world, and in particular of the developing world. We've got to fix that.
And to that point, you've created the Virtual Earth System Research Institute. You want to improve the climate modeling that's out there. So what is the institute?
My wife Wendy started this, and then I've joined her, and she was the progenitor of much of this. We don't understand the hardest problems at the intersection of how these systems work. So a simple example, what's going on between the ice and the ocean with respect to land ice and sea ice, right? That turns out to be a really important scientific problem. The climate models that we have been building, there are 6 or 7 that everybody uses, and they all have formulaic problems that are related to the fact that we can't compute at the level of definition to model it. It's technically, there's not enough computers to compute where all the atoms and the molecules and so forth. So a team at Caltech, which we're funding, built a model where they estimated clouds using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And you go like, why clouds? It turns out that clouds determine a great deal of the outcome. The presence of cloud, the absence of the clouds, where they are and how they move. There are horrific scenarios where if the heating continues to go at its current rate, and we don't stop it, which hopefully we will in 100 years, we will eventually get rid of most of the clouds in the center part of the equator, and they're not recoverable, right? We would literally get rid of them for 1 million years. So we have to take this stuff very seriously. What's interesting about Caltech is that they used AI to estimate clouds. The Navier-Stokes equations, which are the ones that we understand govern how clouds work, are too complicated to calculate, so we simulated them. That's the breakthrough. One of the things to understand is that AI and machine learning are going to be the core technologies that will allow us to get through this. through synthetic biology in terms of, say, growing concrete rather than making concrete. We'll understand how to do that at scale, and many other things.
The data that you use, is it government? Is it private? Where do you get this?
There's lots of data now. The good news is with, everybody has phones, everybody has computers, everyone has hard drives or solid state drives. That data is now getting aggregated. And the modeling data collection part is pretty good. We just funded a data science center in Berkeley to work on this. And I think that the real step-ups are going to be in algorithms. Literally, the AI is at the 10% of where it's going to get. We understand roughly how it works, right? It's very good at classification, very good at recommendation engines, very good at optimizing things. And now these very specialized algorithms will be built by data scientists and computer scientists and mathematicians that will allow us to predict what happens next. Now, the problem, of course, with prediction is that's not enough. You actually have to do something. I used to think, this shows you how naive I was, that if you just talk about something, people would collectively organize to fix it. How naive was I? That's not how America works, not how the world works. I got it. Right, so you have to solve these problems. A good example is that if fusion works, and many people, including myself, believe it will work reasonably soon, which is in the next few decades, AI will be used to model the plasma, right? The plasma that's inside of fusion is at 10 million degrees centigrade, et cetera. And that plasma moves around very quickly. The AI can model it. That's how you contain the plasma to keep it from touching its containment vessel.
So what's going to be the metric for you, as far as you're concerned, for this project's success?
Well, if you're doing forecasting and modeling, your test is pretty straightforward. You try it, make a prediction, learn from it, try it, and you build something which is a better predictor of everyone else. I think it's very important that we remember what the prize is, and the prize is to decrease the warming of the planet, and in particular decrease the amount of carbon that's being emitted. So decarbonization is the rage. What is your strategy for decarbonization? And we are busy funding a whole bunch of things. Interesting. I was thinking about it. Do you know who the most trusted people are in America?
No.
It's not the politicians. It's not the tech people. It's the guys. It's the meteorologists. By the way, it's true. Come on.
They seem skeptical.
And so what happened was we funded, and Wendy is actually the founding board member of it, a group called Climate Central. They started with 12 meteorologists, and they increased it now to 1,000 meteorologists who tell this story. So when you want to change something, you've got to have a theory of action. You have to have how are you going to do it. And because I was so naive, we've now sought after people in your profession. And by the way, it really is true. You are the most trusted people.
Well, it's funny because we do use Climate Central information on the Today Show. A number of our NBC stations, our NBC News Climate Unit, we work with Climate Central a lot, so we really appreciate that. You mentioned biotechnology, and your group, Schmidt Futures, you released a report for our country that you want to move to a bioeconomy, which sounds very esoteric. What is a bioeconomy?
So let's talk about a circular economy. People here in the audience are familiar with this concept. You basically use something, produce something, and then you produce refuse, and the refuse is then used again. That's a circular economy in one form or another. All natural systems have essentially a circular economy. A circular bioeconomy is where you have that circularity, and you're using the raw biomass from other things, like the chaff from wheat. Every state has something that it produces a lot of as debris after it does something. Feeds this into, think of them as breweries. And these breweries are big, right? And they grow stuff in it. We have a lot of evidence that we're about to enter a period where somebody, some country in the world, can dominate what will be a $30 trillion industry. The beauty of the bioeconomy, if we do it right, is it solves a bunch of problems. First, it helps solve climate because you can grow the food rather than, I'll give you an example. There are ways of fixing nitrogen in plants in such a way that they consume less nitrogen. You can make them more climate resistant. You can grow the materials, as I mentioned. There's one project that's working on the ability to make runways by growing them. Literally, you spray them. Now, when I say grow, how are they grown? They're grown in the equivalent of yeast, in the equivalent of breweries. Now, these breweries are big, and furthermore, they'll produce a lot of jobs. And by the way, guess where those jobs are going to be? The rural states of America, and in particular, Republican ones. So if you think about it politically, it makes sense that if we get the whole country to embrace the essentially bioeconomy, live a biotic world, it's good for the country, it's good for politics, because people will agree on it for a change. The facts will win. It'll be good for science, and it'll help solve the problem.
But given where we are right now in this country, politically, when you talk about just renewable energy, it suddenly becomes a political divide. Are you optimistic that making a sea change in the way we produce things can happen here?
You're more of an expert on our political system than I. I'd like to have a political system that operates based on facts. And the facts are that we're in trouble and that the cost of future generations are increasing. We have a situation now where the Arab world and India are in the process of becoming unlivable. It's called the wet bulb temperature. You can't actually go outside. You actually can't evaporate enough water to stay alive as a human. How is that okay? So as a political matter, we've got to come up with stuff in the American system, which is broken in half, where both sides agree, right? So at the moment, if you look at our political leadership, they agree on Ukraine. And I agree with them. That's good. We probably all agree. Right. Let's find some others. Energy can be understood as both a climate problem, but also a business problem. If you reinvented the energy systems around these new technologies and people were making money, a lot of people would calm down. Right. The problem was that renewables came in from the side. They weren't seen as legitimate and so forth. There is a long-term problem that you have trouble with getting enough base load out of renewables. In order to solve that problem, you need either very large batteries, which people are working on, and we could build them, so that's a good idea. But I think the truth is we're going to need more base load.
You mentioned future generations dealing with this. You've got a program, RISE, that looks at these brilliant young people. How does this fit into trying to fight this climate crisis?
So we announced $1 billion program over lifetimes to support the super smart next generation of people who will bail us out of the mess that we've all created. And the theory was that, and there's some evidence, that you can identify these people at 15 or 16. So we set up a complicated global test with recommendations and so forth. And one of the things that they had to do was to do a project. There's a woman in Mexico who was, I think, particularly illustrative. She built a hydroponic system. Hydroponic means it's self-contained ecosystem, essentially, to grow vegetables and plants. And this is, there are so many examples of new people and their ideas, and the generation that's below us is much, much more concerned about this than we ever were. And so we need to acknowledge that, and we need to give them the money and support them. That's an example.
As you look at this, is this almost in a sense a human incubator of next level ideas?
But the question, let me say it another way. There is an Einstein somewhere in the world. We just haven't found him or her. There's a next president at 15. We haven't found him or her. And so to the degree that we can look for these people of extraordinary commitment and extraordinary talent and extraordinary ability, let's get them there faster. That's the idea. It's a training program of a particular kind. In this particular case, we have sort of a bias, which is like them to come to the US and come to these schools, because the universities in the US are particularly excellent in this stuff.
When you look at these young people that you have in this program and others, do they give you optimism? Are you optimistic about the future given who these young people are?
The generation that's now coming in their 20s is so extraordinarily more impressive than the previous generation, which I was impressed with. And I think it's partly because they've grown up essentially internet savvy, right? So their whole experience has been the explosion of information. And those who had the intellectual ability or emotional maturity to take advantage of it could grow very, very quickly. And that's a great sign. The problem here is you have a collective action problem, and you have to basically agree that there are things that are more important than any one thing. And that's a problem in democracy. And in autocracies, you have a collective action problem in the sense that the collective action doesn't oppose the autocracy enough, and the autocracy then does whatever it is its rent-seeking behavior, which is typically a destruction of the habitat. So neither democracy nor autocracy seems to be a particularly good fit to the problem we have now.
Do you feel that the citizens of any given country, let's say here, are in a sense ahead of their politicians, that they want change, but that perhaps their government isn't providing what they need?
Some do. One of the things to understand about politicians today is that they are an accurate survey of today's voter preferences. And I don't mean tomorrow's or yesterday. Our political class is so tied to daily polling, daily messaging, they're told what to say and so forth, that system does not produce wisdom. It produces polling. And so you have to figure out a way to get the society to have a wiser view of this. What's interesting is that, again, using Democrats and Republicans, both groups care a lot about the planet. They may for different reasons, but they care a lot, right? The religious groups, for example, that we've worked with, they care a lot about the planet because God gave it to us. And we are the stewards, if you will, of something that God created. And this is their belief, and they're willing to put money into it. We need to harness that energy more.
And we touched on this briefly, but I want to go back to artificial intelligence. Is artificial intelligence, if not the key, one of the keys to this problem?
Well, let's assume that fusion remains far away. How are you going to solve this problem? The most obvious way is with demand-side management. We have supply-side management in the sense that you can turn on and off, commands. But if we were to modernize the grid, which we don't seem to be able to do, although we keep talking about it, and if we then had dynamic demand-side management with some kind of economics around that, shift your load to the evenings and so forth, and did it uniformly, it would work pretty well. So remember, energy is a business, and the more you can treat it like a business and use either taxes or subsidies to get what you want, the better, right? Most people will respond to a price signal around energy if it's made apparent to them.
We tend to be somewhat forgetful. We go in cycles when energy prices are low, we're not worried about it. And then something happens, and all of a sudden, it's, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What is it going to take to break that cycle, do you think?
Well, the U.S., of course, is the largest manufacturer and exporter of oil and gas now. So we're in this strange position where we're not as affected by the change in dollar prices. And I think you can argue that gas prices are, in that sense, relatively low for the value preserved. But I think the right way to do this is to get the economics so that you have the equivalent of a carbon price or a regulatory cost that essentially causes less carbon going to the atmosphere. If I were able to do this, but no one can do this, not even the President of the United States, if you could magically change everything, you would get rid of all of the subsidies and all of the taxes, and you'd let the market work it with one tax, which is a carbon tax. And you would adjust that carbon tax up over time. And over time meaning over decades. Right? You start at something. And so here's an example. Let's say you have a controversial carbon source, a pipeline or something. You could imagine as a policy that you could approve the pipeline, but add a carbon tax to that pipeline. And that would establish the principle that there is a carbon tax and there is a price, and that would begin the market. That's a sort of a liberal idea. There are plenty of other ways of solving this problem, but the most important thing to do is energy is a business. People are investing, they're investing over the long run. We should be investing in the right kinds of power systems.
And as we close, what are you most excited about right now?
The union of the AI, the modeling, and the research is going to give us, on one side, and then this bioeconomy on the other. The two of them together are going to give us a real shot at solving this problem. And I'm more excited about it than I've ever been. I'm also worried that once again, because the way our system works and because we're not on a war footing and we're not actually taking this seriously, that we'll miss this window. And every year of delay has huge compounding costs. It's very easy to understand. I also worry a lot about the collective action problem across the globe, but you can't moralize against you unless I represent good morals, right? You've got to take ownership yourself. And people always say, well, they don't do it, so we won't do it. That's a bad way to live your life. It's also a bad way to run your country, and it's not a good way to solve this problem.
Eric Schmidt.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all.